Welcome back. WNST by our friends at Cole Roofing. I am enjoying the Royal Farms Kona Blend out of the Cole Roofing mug here this morning. You can find Cole Roofing anywhere roofs are here in the great state of Maryland and beyond. Bill Cole joins us once a week to talk about his love of sports and our friendship, as well as his sponsorship for all that we're doing here. Corporate, commercial roof spaces, and of course, Fister Energy doing the energy up on the roof as well. And our friends, of course, at Costas. I crack some crabs down there with my wife. It's not the same at Costas without my mom. I always go there, and everybody reminds me of my mom. We gave away some Free the Bird shirts. Gave away about 36 Free the Bird shirts last week over there. Got a handful of them left. If you're interested in the Free the Bird shirt, toss me a note, nasty@WNST.net. And if you're interested in crabs, Costas is a great place to start that adventure. And a crab cake over there. My wife had the ribs. They were phenomenal. I brought some ribs home from Costas off the pit, and I had them for lunch on Sunday. Fantastic. Went perfect with World Cup. Luke Jones is not watching World Cup in the mornings like I am here all month long. He is instead focused on the fifth place Baltimore Orioles as we get up on the trading deadline. Our dear Orioles series is out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, as well as in our morning newspaper and the front of WNST.net as we take this month here to take stock of all things Orioles. Luke, Brady Anderson, this is his love letter. And, I could sit here and play all wistful, and I'm sure I will at some point during this segment. Brady Anderson was my favorite baseball player. Did you know that, or did you not know that?
I think I'd known that at one point, sure.
When the deal happened with Schilling and was brought over in the Boston deal, Boddicker, I believe, right? That's without looking it up, but it was 32 years ago or whatever. I just was a Brady Anderson fan. He struggled. They wanted him to slap the ball around. They wanted him to run like the wind. And he was almost off to Japan. His career almost ended. He was a part of really good and bad parts of Oriole baseball in 88 and 89 and sort of the hinterlands of 90 and 91 as they were closing down 33rd Street. And he was trying to figure out how to get here. He gets, in one winter, his body changes. His muscle mass changes. He comes back. All of a sudden, he's a home run hitter. He's a home run leadoff hitter. All of a sudden, he's a millionaire. All of a sudden, he's a multimillionaire. All of a sudden, he's got, sexy muscle posters. And I had a relationship, a very, very good relationship with Brady Anderson for all the years that he played here. 92, 93, 94. We chased girls together. We went to dinner together. We had lunches together. We water skied together. We rode in cabs together. We played the music game in cabs together. I think Brady is an intellectual guy. He's a sharp-witted guy. I'm not a Brady hater from that perspective in any way. I think looking back on the era and the era of performance-enhancing drugs, he certainly falls in the category of suspicious. But that being said, it's 20 years later, and somehow his relationship inside the Angelos family, which at its genesis began with a phone call to me. I remember talking to Brady Anderson for the better part of maybe 2 hours late one night. My phone rang at 11 o'clock at night Eastern. This was when the Orioles were in the bottom of the depths. He asked me what was going on in Baltimore. I gave him an honest assessment. I never really heard back from him. I ran into him once over breakfast in Federal Hill. Next thing I know, he's sort of quasi-employed. The next thing I know, I ran into him at Sports Legends about 6 months before my wife got cancer, and he pulled me into the corner and told me what a piece of human garbage I was. And a lot of the fake news, Trump sort of, you're a fake journalist, you're not a real journalist, you don't know what you're talking about, the Angelos family's the greatest thing that's ever happened here, you don't own the team, they do, if you don't like it, you can leave Baltimore. And that's the last time I talked to Brady Anderson, so that was 5 years ago. So that's my whole relationship with Brady Anderson in, 60 seconds or less. And I know he's sort of running things because people like you that have press credentials tell me. So I'll let you pick it up from here because you're around and I'm not. He's certainly tied to lots and lots and lots of things, but is a little bit of a mystery, right? Like, I don't see him out carousing with fans. I don't see pictures of him. I don't see social media. I don't see thoughts. Very rarely is he sort of on the record and around. He's certainly not out in front of this thing. If anybody is running the shadows of this, it's Brady Anderson, right?
Yeah, and even that part of it, I mean, I'm hesitant to say he's running things because that implies that there's a chain of command. I mean, seriously, does he have influence? Absolutely. I mean, I think anyone who is denying that at this point, I mean, your head's completely in the sand. How much influence in relation to whatever influence Dan Duquette has or Buck Showalter has or Peter, John, Lou, I mean, you kind of just go down the list, and that's where it's just so muddied as far as what this really looks like. I mean, I think it's clear that he's garnered and gained more influence as time has gone on. I mean, I was just looking at kind of the timeline. He came in as a special assistant in right around 2011, 2012, and then eventually was kind of named. Promoted to, quote, Vice President of Baseball Operations, which, Dan Duquette's Executive Vice President of Baseball Operations. And he's held this hybrid role. And I want to make this very clear. As much as with the Orioles being in last place and having such a disastrous season and such an uncertain, scary-looking future, I want to make it clear that Brady Anderson, since he's come in, it hasn't been all negative. I mean, I can tell you he's worked with players. He's had players, come out and work out with him in the off season at his home and different things like that. And he's had good relationships with a lot of players. And there have been things that Buck Showalter has praised him for. There have been things that Dan Duquette has praised him for over the years. But that said, anytime you have someone working in this kind of hybrid role that he's been in, where he's been part coach, part nutritionist, he's dabbled in some contract negotiating, especially here in the last 2 or 3 years. I think in this day and age with baseball front office infrastructures changing, that's not necessarily a terrible thing to have someone that can wear a different hat. But that said,
Swiss Army knife. There you go. Just like I see in the FIFA ads in the morning, right?
Yeah. I don't think that in and of itself is necessarily a bad thing if, and this is where the rub is, if there's a clear chain of command and if there's accountability and if there is someone that he's going to answer to. Now, by the way it looks from a title standpoint, he should be answering to Dan Duquette. And that hasn't really, I think it's clear, it's become clear with various reports and things that free agent signings such as even Alex Cobb and Andrew Kashner this past offseason have cited negotiating and having talks with Brady Anderson. And,
that's how a ball player gets $53 million on March 23rd, right?
Yeah, so I think, I just think it's just so uncertain, not that he hasn't had influence and not that he hasn't even done some good things, but at the same time, when you have this unique relationship with players where you've worked out with guys, you've taken certain individuals under your wing even, you've gone to bat for certain individuals in the organization, I think that's where it becomes really, at best, really iffy. And I'm putting the most positive spin on it. Really iffy then when you're talking about an individual who could be running the place from a president standpoint. I know he's talked about not really wanting to be a traditional general manager. Whether that becomes the case or not, who knows at this point. But
well, in 7 years here, right, he's had his fingers in everything, right? So if there's been an apprenticeship for him to run around and sort of poke around at how the place is run. Now, that being said, he's never run a popsicle stand. He's never run a lemonade stand. And I've always found that as a guy who has tried to run a company here and has done it successfully, because we're about to celebrate 20 years on August 3rd, so I guess I could call that successful. It doesn't always feel that way, or you don't always feel as competent as someone who wakes up every day born to be a general manager of a radio station or whatever, because that certainly was not my role. Brady Anderson is, spent enough time around here to know whether he can sit at a desk, push a pencil, make a phone call, do a press conference, get out in front of something. And quite frankly, it's been very Angelosian here, Like if we're going to talk about the old man in this role and we're going to get into what Brady Anderson represents, dude, he represents the mole. There's always been a mole. Peter's always had a mole from the very beginning. If you go back to, from Frank Wren, there was Sid Thrift. When there was Sid Thrift, there was Mike Flanagan. When there was Mike Flanagan, in comes McPhail, who was always on the phone with Peter all along anyway when things were unraveling there. That's how he wound up in a seat on a Monday morning. That wasn't like Peter calling Andy McPhail on a Sunday. That was months and months of mulling of how I would do it differently. And this has gone on from the beginning. Rick Dempsey was a mole for a long, long time, during the Lee Mazzilli administration. So, there's always been someone, almost always a former ball player or someone with silver in their hair like Sid Thrift. And I wrote about this in the Peter Principles. Peter's always had sort of this quiet consigliere who reports to him, who's a little bit of an eye out, keeping a lookout on what's going on in the kitchen, And that Peter's always had that. Brady's been that guy in the modern era for the boys, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, whether he's shown that he can be in charge, wants to be in charge, is capable of being in charge, it would not be the first time that the Angelos family appointed the friends of the family, see Rick Dempsey, see Mike Bordick in the booth. I mean, they fall in love with people. Sidney Ponson, Brian Roberts, Adam Jones, Nick Markakis, and they keep them around. And I don't know that there's anything good, bad, or indifferent about that. Loyalty's a wonderful thing. But is Brady Anderson qualified to be the best general manager, the best baseball operations, the best president that a Major League Baseball franchise can find in 2019? I don't know. We're going to find out, but I don't think he's going anywhere. I think whatever happens, Brady Anderson will have an Orioles badge on opening day next year and be involved in some way, which means if you're going to general manage, scout, be involved, you're going to be dealing with Brady either up or down the food chain, or in this case, to your point, sideways, which is the worst way, right? Where at any point he shows up on a field in Bowie with hitting fungos, and no one has stopped it. It has been barked about by his colleagues in the media. It has been had their nose pinched and held by people in baseball saying what's going on over there. And I don't think it's going to change in this offseason because I don't think they know how to change it. I mean, I was once told by a very high-level person who ran the Orioles at one point that if the boys were capable of running it, they'd be running it. You know what I mean? Like, they would be sitting in a chair right now, having press conferences, running the company from the front and saying, I'm in charge. I need your support. I need you to buy skyboxes if you're a business. I need you to buy media if you're a business. I need you to buy tickets if you're a fan. I need you to buy into what we're doing. I need the media to sell a good story about what we're doing and tell the story. There's none of that going on. I mean, these two kids have been around for 30 years. They're not kids. They're older than me. And no one knows who they are, what their philosophy is. And over the next 6 months or 8 months, we're going to find out if they're going to jump on the piano here and run the thing, or whether this thing is still being run by some sort of weird proxy. But because of the decisions with Buck and Dan and Machado, guys like you and me are going to ask questions. I don't expect answers. It's the Angelos family. We haven't had an answer from anyone around there in 20 years, but we're going to ask those questions even if it's rhetorical, and someone will be charged with, I dealt Manny Machado for this group of players. At some point, we will ferret that out, or at least ask a lot of tough questions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what we've been talking about for months, even going back to last year, or even the year before that, when we started talking about the big picture. I mean, what is the chain of command? What is the vision? What is the vision for this organization if we are working under the assumption that John and or Lou Angelos are going to be in charge, and we know that they've had more influence recently. I think that's become abundantly clear.
Yeah, because kids are free.
to what degree, though? And I think that's where there's so much uncertainty. I mean, to your point, as far as what you heard a former GM, baseball ops person tell you, there's merit and there's validity to that. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't run it effectively, but there is something to the idea of, well, if they haven't done it to this point,
if their best idea is running around with Brady Anderson and giving Alex Cobb $30 million and letting Machado dangle, if these are their best ideas, then God have mercy on all of us. Seriously, if their best idea is what's currently happening, it's piss poor. It really is. Not just the record. I'm talking about what the strategy is, because having Dan Duquette be involved in this when he has no stake in this, having Buck Showalter be involved in this when he has no stake in this, and doing all of these video love letters with Manny Machado and this long-lost fan in Atlanta, it doesn't give me the warm fuzzies when he's wearing a Red Sox hat in 5 weeks or a Yankees hat in 6 months. So I don't know what they're trying to do marketing-wise, and that's where John thinks he's a genius, right? And I certainly, on the baseball side of where the long-term deal is, that you're going to be dealing these players without the person who's going to be running the organization at this critical time. It's as absurd as anything the old man has done. I mean, just in relationship to having the best ball player they've ever had, arguably, all right? You talk about Brooks Robinson, but Manny Machado, they've had this piece that in the modern era could have brought you 5 ball players 2 years ago, 3 good ball players a year ago. Now it may bring you a number 3 starter. You may get an Eduardo Rodriguez out of this before it's all over with, and would have to feel good with that if that's where you are in 2020. It's disgraceful. It really is. I mean, there is no plan. There's no one in front of it. They're in last place. They're about to give away the best player they've ever had, literally, for this the best player they've ever drafted and brought through. And there's no one to even ask a question to who might not be unemployed in 90 days. It's disgraceful. And Brady Anderson, there's the guy there who has the slipperiness of no accountability at all, right? Never has to answer a question. He's not at the top of the food chain, although he made the Cobb deal. It's absolutely in the vein of Peter. And I've been reading up on Rocky Wirtz. I have, Luke, right? Because when I start to compare John Angelos and Lou Angelos to are you Rocky or are you Bullwinkle? And when I talk about Rocky Wirtz, there's now a 10-year body of work. His old man died in 07, right? Beginning in 08, he took over. They've won 3 cups. And I go back 25 years to see what Larry Lucchino has done and what Bill DeWitt has done. 5 championships in St. Louis and Boston for guys who would have been the people running this organization. That was the group. The group was Lucchino and DeWitt were buying this team. The difference between that and this manure show that continues on to say who will be running the team in February. And if they're running the team in February or running the team in October or November, if it's Ned Colletti, why aren't they running the trading deadline right now? Why weren't they running the draft 3 weeks ago? None of this makes any more sense than any of the stupid garbage Peter ever did, quite frankly. It just doesn't have Peter out in front of it barking stupid stuff like, we don't need these Latin American players. I don't believe in that. We don't believe they're foreign. We don't believe in foreign. We're American around here. We're not going to scout out in Korea. I mean, so whatever that philosophy is that flows down, it's still greatly, greatly affecting this organization and its ability to act like a normal organization, even mired in the muck that they're in, where some good deals over the next month could really fix things around here. And I don't know who the mechanic is that's underneath the hood right now.
Well, and it's funny because now they've gotten to a point where, and I've felt all along, I thought there should have been some kind of resolution to the general manager picture last year. To prevent going into a lame duck situation. but it's gotten to the point they've gotten so close to the
That would mean that we're having to pay Dan Duquette. We're paying him to do the job. He's going to show up and do the job. I mean, if you walk into Peter, that's probably the answer you get, right? Like, I don't – what is the other answer? Dan's doing a fine job. He's here. He's motivated. He's gonna do a great job. I mean, I don't know what Peter really thinks or what John and Lou could really think, because to the rest of us, this is absurd. I mean, it's an absurd premise to have the structure that they have right now at this key point. I don't know that there's any way they can't screw this up. I'm not. I literally look at it. It's like watching the car crash before it crashes and saying, "Oh no, I can't look, but I must." Right? Like literally.
Well, but to finish my thought, they've gotten to the point where it's now too late to bring in a new GM. I think that would be the wrong thing to do at this point, because you're a month away. No one could get up to speed with the organization and the groundwork that you've laid with anything you've done over the last calendar year, going back to last year, talks you had with teams about Zach Britton at that point, off-season talks you had with Manny Machado, all of that groundwork that has been laid that you hope will still lead to some kind of a decent deal. I'm not saying that will happen, but there's still possibilities that can happen. But you've gotten so close to the trade deadline that any thought of bringing in someone new, I think that would be counterproductive at this stage. Now, 3 months ago, yeah, that would be a different story. But it's just, it really is crazy when you think about this, when you consider where they're heading as an organization, how pivotal the next 40 days could be for them, or less than 40 days, as far as making a trade, as far as narrowing down your best possible deals for Machado, for Adam Jones, for Zach Britton, for Brad Brock, for maybe Mark Trumbo, and even go beyond that if some team comes calling for Kevin Gausman, or if some team's not all that bothered by Jonathan Scope having a down year and still wants to give you a big return for him. Whether that's likely or not, I don't know, but you have all these decisions to make, and the people that are making them, or the people that are at least in the discussion making them, are people that are probably not going to be here in the next few months. So it's the backwards way of doing it completely. The only thing you can hang your hat on now in that regard is Dan Duquette's, he's working for his next job at this point. So it serves him no positive outcome to jake this or to not do the best that he can. But even if he does negotiate and get you a good deal or a good offer for a Machado or for a Britton, is that going to be approved? Is ownership going to say okay? Is what Brady Anderson says, is that going to be okay? Are they going to approve that? Or is it going to be Duquette kind of doing all this groundwork, and while you get the whole, we'll get back to you. And then before you know it, that team that had an offer on the table for Machado goes and gets someone else. And then you're kind of left with, either nothing, or you're left with one team that then has more leverage and can kind of pull a fast one over on you. So it's just, there's nothing ideal about it whatsoever. And that's, even if you like Dan Duquette, even if you are still a Buck Showalter guy, even if you're higher on Brady Anderson than some people are, you still have, this is a toxic situation that's there right now. And I don't even mean that in terms of people not having the best intentions.
Well, and the word's out. I mean, who's interviewing with a gig here with an old man that's 1 foot in, 1 foot out? Mom's sort of kind of running the place. The boys are trying to figure things out. Brady's their consigliere. You're about to give away all of these parts, and it's going to get dropped on the feet of the assistant general manager of the Rockies, or the assistant general manager of the Angels or the Mariners is going to leave to come here into a not-so-good job circumstance. I mean, I keep wondering who is going to manage this team next year, And that's not Brady Anderson. That's not what he aspires to do, right? Like, that's not part of what that's not the Swiss Army knife role for him. But somebody's going to have to come in and manage, and they're going to say, oh, meet Brady. He's going to do whatever he wants. Good luck with that.
Right.
And that's how Buck has described it in the media. That's how Duquette has described it in the media. That's how it's been described to me by the 5 or 6 people that I still know who run around there who bleed me information whenever I ask for it. And that's where we are, as they are in last place, the worst team in baseball, arguably among the worst, if not the worst, minor league farm system. No confidence at all that you can, scout anybody whose name is Julio or Jorge. It's kind of outlandish. I mean, this is not. It's not a good job, right? So to the point of us talking about Brady Anderson being the guy running it, if he's going to be a part of it, and he is, the whole thing becomes toxic if he's not going to run it. You might as well let him run it, put his name on it, make him accountable for it, even if he's not qualified to do it, and even if I think the real problem here, we go back to Dan Duquette. Who's going to take this job? What traditional, upwardly mobile baseball guy your age, some 34, 36, 38, 40-year-old guy on the way up, looking to have a living the next 15 years, being Theo Epstein, says, yeah, Baltimore, boy, that's going to be the move. That's going to fix my career. We're going to go there and compete with the Red Sox and the Yankees in this crazy family where the old man's about to die, and who knows what's going to happen with mom, and who knows whether the boys can get along, and who knows who's running the place, and Brady Anderson's in the corner, and what do we got? I got Bundy and I got Gosman. What else do I have? Oh, I got $130 million we owe Chris Davis. This is not an attractive job. I for anyone at this point. So I don't know that they're going to get anybody top of class to come. They're certainly not going to be out in the free agency market, adding players in the offseason. They're going to be young and cheap, and that's the kind of team they're going to be next year and for the next couple of years. And they're going to need, like, a manager who's ready to lose 100 games and learn on the job, right? And I don't know that the Kevin Cash types of the world are going to find this job to be appealing. I just don't. I think that's going to be the real dirty secret, is how many people turn this gig down over the next 6 months.
Well, I think there's definitely going to be people that are going to shy away from it. But at the same time, it's one of 30 jobs. And we use that analogy in every sport, whether you're talking about a NFL head coach, whether you're talking about a GM in the NHL, whatever. There's a finite number of positions that are like that. So, and when you're an assistant GM somewhere or director of scouting, whatever your position is in your current job, there tends to be a window, and sometimes that's based off of how your current team's doing, what your age is, what your desires are, what your plans are, and that does. Yes, I'm totally in agreement that there probably will be some individuals that we probably don't even find out about, that through back channels they'll be contacted by the Orioles to say, hey, want to come talk to us about our GM spot. And
well, that's one of the things to sit down with Buck Showalter when all this is said and done and say, what made you take the gig? And, I mean, when I write to Buck, not only did you take the gig, you actually won, which I don't know that a whole lot of other. I mean, Joe Girardi didn't see that pathway. Bobby Valentine didn't see that pathway. Other baseball people did not see that pathway. I would like to know who lands on a plane, comes up to the warehouse, sits with John and Lou and Brady in a room, and literally after 6 hours goes back to the airport, flies home, and says to their wife, boy, I got the gig. We're going to go to Baltimore, win 100 games, and win 3 championships. I mean, that's what we're going to do. We're going to pick up our lives here in Detroit or in Minnesota or Boston or whatever organization we're in. We're going to go down to Baltimore, and we're going to do. I mean, that Duquette guy, he didn't know what he was doing in Buck. I mean, Duquette took this gig and couldn't wait to get out of here 2 years in, right? And the road is littered with that with this family. And I just think. You say there are 30 jobs. I think there are 29 jobs in this one. This is a very unique job, bro, really. And I think as I start to unpeel this over the next 6 months, and I talk to the Jason Starks, and I talk to the baseball people, I think you're going to find out there's 29 jobs, and this is a different kind of job.
Well, again, I didn't disagree with you on that, but they've managed to find some decent people over the years.
They have.
I mean, they hired Buck Showalter, and you can say all you want. Well, I can't believe Buck came here. Well, they hired him, so that's where they do deserve credit for doing that. In the case of Dan Duquette, they do deserve credit for bringing in Duquette, even if 4 other people turned them down in the meantime. So I hear what you're saying on that, and I don't disagree, and I don't think that there aren't significant obstacles, but at the same time, Buck Showalter clearly saw there was something going on here that they had going in their favor, and that's not to say that they're going to find that person who feels the same exact way this time around. I'm not all that terribly concerned about the manager right now because I think that's very inconsequential until you have baseball ops under control and you hopefully revamp some things, and you hope that the Angelos Sons change their father's tune on international scouting, and so it's always the trickle-down effect. I hear what you're saying as far as it having its obstacles, but again, there are only so many opportunities to run something, and maybe it's a case that they get lucky and they find the next Theo Epstein who is so eager to run a place that ignores warnings from other people to work there. But, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but, if we just talk about it in that context, well, then they're never, ever going to win, and they might as well just close up shop and move because they're completely doomed. So I don't think that's necessarily the case, but sure, they absolutely have their work cut out for them to find the right person. And, I'll add another layer to this until we know for sure. You mentioned Brady Anderson, but, in the case of Dan Duquette, there was already a manager in place. Now, I have by no means am I certain or confident that Buck Showalter is going to remain in the organization, but I'm also not 100% certain that he's gone after this year either. So you throw that into the equation, whether it's him staying on as manager, whether it's him moving into some kind of baseball ops role, that's just someone else to add to the equation that has been here, has a longer tenure than any potential general manager you're going to bring in. So believe me, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it. But
I don't think Brady Anderson, as it relates to him, he's not going anywhere, right? I mean, he will be working with this organization next summer for or underneath or above or sideways with some. I mean, that of all the things we're going to talk about, of all the uncertainty, Brady is in Angelos at this point. I mean, literally. I mean, I don't think he's going anywhere. And I think if you're going to manage the team or general manage the team or be involved, you better be a friend of Brady or get along with Brady, or you're not going to be here very long.
Yeah, and look, I don't think Brady Anderson is someone that's impossible to get along with either, but...
Nor do I. I mean, I began this by, I just think it's... If I'm on the outside, and I've done 25 years of research on this, which I have, this job's toxic, dude. I mean, unless you're Cal Ripken, right? So maybe this is where I ring the bell in June and say, well, Brady and Cal had a thing, and maybe that is, you know what I mean? That's when the Cal Ripken rumors would start, because that would be the cavalry riding in, and they'll make Rick Dempsey the manager, and we'll just fix everything, and we'll hill charge with old Orioles. I mean, that's kind of the way the Angelos boys probably think about this. That's probably one of the reasons they let Brady Anderson run around, because there's a million other baseball people, analytics people in the that they could have fallen in love with over the last decade. They fell in love with the guy on the growth poster, because it said Orioles on it, and they knew him from when they were kids, and that's the way this place operates, man. You know what I mean? It really does operate that way.
Well, and I think that's where it becomes more interesting. To a point you made a few minutes ago, and I actually completely agree with you. Unless it's his own doing, unless he decides for whatever reason he wants to do something different, I think it's very clear that he's going to be in this organization having a lot of influence in some capacity. And from that standpoint, I think you are better off just making him president of baseball ops. Now, that said, that doesn't mean he becomes the de facto general manager. In a perfect world, sure, maybe he becomes the guy in charge. But hopefully, and again, this is where we kind of go back to the unknown with John and Lou Angelos, and you hope, if that's the case, he hires someone and says, look, I'm not a general manager who's going to sit behind the desk. I don't want to be putting in waiver claims. I don't want to be the one negotiating contracts with agents. I don't want to be doing that stuff. I'm more the big picture, guy that's, and I don't even know what the comp would be around baseball as far as just, there's plenty of presidents of organizations that aren't doing the day-to-day and making the trades. So you hope, if that's the structure they go with, that they hire someone and then that person has a lot of power. It's never full autonomy. We know that. That's the history of this organization, and I always remind that
there's never full autonomy. It always winds up at the desk of someone who doesn't know anything. That's the problem. It always winds up being decided in the end by the person who has the least expertise to make that decision, who is the guy who's out trying asbestos cases, and that's been every major decision for 25 years. Some of them have been deodorized, some of them haven't been, but you know that going in, that's the way it's been. I think the question of the Dear Orioles series all the way around is, like the song, how's it going to be? How's it going to be moving forward? And how it's been the last 6 months, maybe even worse than it ever was, because you always knew you had Peter to stroke in the end. You at least knew where you had to go to get an answer. I don't think anybody knows where to get an answer anymore, right? I mean, at this particular juncture, there is no ultimate answer giver because it depends on how Peter's back feels and his sciatica is today, literally.
Right. And that's where there's so much more uncertainty. That's where, if you want to have hope, you say, well, there's going to be some change coming at some point in time, and it's not tough to figure out what I'm implying there with an owner who's in his late 80s, whether it's him just ceding control, whether it's the boys selling the team at some point over the next few years.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that too.
You just don't know. So if you want to have hope and you want to try to put the positive spin on it, unknown is better than known that's terrible, right? I guess. Unknown can be terrible or it can be good. So there is at least unknown there, but in the meantime, it's a heck of a lot of uncertainty, and it really does go back. I guess the one, to kind of go back into the uncertainty category, assuming Brady Anderson is still around, and there's no reason to think he's not going to be, and if they do make him de facto president of the organization, and maybe he becomes more of a figurehead that you hope is out in front of media a little bit more. It's not as though Brady never talks to the media. He doesn't do it frequently, but he's available.
Well, here's the big question, Brady. Here's question number one. What do you do around here? What's your role? Who do you answer to? Those are the first questions that I would ask if I got in front of him. But he's not going to talk to me. He told me I should leave Baltimore the last time I got together with him. But so in front of my wife. So that's out in front of the media. I don't know if out in front of the media is accepting a conversation with press box once a year. At some point, somebody needs to show a plan here, or maybe not. I don't think Brady's of the mindset. I think he's very Angelosian, which is, it's none of your business. It's none of anybody's business. We'll operate the team the way we want to operate the team. That's how Brady's always dealt with me. It's none of your business.
Well, and if that's the way they're going to continue to run it, I think they're going to have a very difficult time trying to build their brand or even maintain it at this point, based on what we've seen with attendance being down really the last couple of years. Even on the tail end of them still being a winning, contending club, attendance was falling. So, those are things that they need to certainly reassess. We've talked about the communication piece. We've talked about establishing a plan and voicing that plan, even if you're not going to lay out every single detail, because no one lays out every single detail of their rebuild or who they plan to sign or who they're going to hire until they actually get that person hired. But you'd like to see, if not more transparency, at least more evidence of structure and more evidence of a plan and more evidence of, yeah, this is really bad right now, but we have A, B, C, and D in place. We plan to do E, F, and G, and we think that's going to get us back on track to winning. Maybe not overnight, maybe not in 2019, but we think it's going to get us back to being competitive come 2020, 2021, 2022. And if you saw those things in place, and they didn't have a lame duck general manager, and they didn't have a lame duck manager, and they didn't have one of the best players in franchise history and one of the most important players in franchise history about to walk out the door via free agency or trade.
And potentially coming back in here in pinstripes next year, probably, right? Or like
that you can't control where they're going to go. I mean, that part of it's unmoved. I'm unmoved.
But that's
by
the
that,
hardest part,
frankly.
I think, from a fan standpoint, is watching him come back in. If he goes off and signs with the Phillies, that would not sting for the for being a black eye for the organization to have him come in here and hit 3 home runs on a weekend next year and win 3 out of 4 games and have that go on for the next 7 years. I hear you. I mean, I'm not being the rabid fan, but I'm saying that there is a part of that perception that if he winds up in New York or Boston, it's far worse for them, or Washington. It's far worse for them, I think.
Yeah, I hear you. Certainly from an optics standpoint, I mean, it's far worse for him because he's not on the team. You're not getting that player who's worth anywhere between 5 to 7 wins over the course of a season. So I hear you, and certainly from an optics standpoint. And you know me, I'm not a warm and fuzzy kind of guy as much as a lot of people as far as optics just for the sake of optics or making a PR move just for the sake of doing
you've
it.
also been around this long enough to know that, you only hold on to players as long as they can play, and that's that. And you take more of an Ozzie Newsome approach on that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of that kind of stuff ends up being eyewash. I mean, we always hear, you need to sign some players so fans will come out. There's very few players that actually matter in terms of fans coming out to watch them. Cal Ripken, Derek Jeter, Mike Trout in Anaheim, and even he's probably the appeal doesn't match his greatness.
In modern-day baseball, you are absolutely right. At any given point, there might be 1, might be 2 players in the whole game that at any point during the year, maybe their last year through, you want to go see Jeter play or, whoever that legendary guy is. But there's not – you're right. That's gone. That's all over with. People come for the crab game now and the ketchup and mustard races, of which you're very – you are the Chuck Thompson of ketchup and mustard races.
But that said, that doesn't mean that stuff doesn't matter at all. I want to make very clear about that. I've said this to you for the better part of the last 2 months, how this organization hasn't even just gone out and and I don't think Buck Showalter or Dan Duquette's the one to do it because we know that there's no long-term guarantee for them. There's no long-term security for them. We're not expecting both of them to come back. No one expects that at this point. I mean, maybe there's still a chance Buck Showalter comes back, at least in some capacity. But it's where I've said over and over, even if you don't go and fire people right away or make drastic changes immediately, at least get out in front of this and say, look, we know this is really messed up. We're embarrassed by how bad we've been on the field this year. And no one anticipated us being this bad. And that's true because even you and I didn't expect this team to be this bad. No one thought they'd be this bad. But to go out, and I get it that it's a Captain Obvious statement to acknowledge that and to vow changes and to say you're going to get this right and to say that you're going to do things to improve your fortunes over the next few months and hire good people and bring in young players and have a youth movement. That in and of itself is just eyewash to say that, but that doesn't mean that it still doesn't have some value in the interim. And when you talk about it in that context and how this team has just gone along and hasn't made any meaningful changes, and it really is crazy in that regard. And I even said, I mean, if to go back to the point, the suggestion you made that if Brady Anderson's going to be around, then make him the guy that's in charge, and then hire whatever you want to call the guy underneath him that would run more of the day-to-day. I mean, there's lots of teams that have that kind of structure. Even really highly functioning teams have structures that at least look like that. Now, is it actually being applied like that? That would be the big question. But it might have been there could have been some value to the Orioles back in May saying that Brady Anderson has been promoted to and make up whatever title you want to, and to have him get in front of a camera and address what this complete cluster has been over the last couple of months. And again, doesn't mean you even have to do anything meaningful in the interim, but at least acknowledge how messed up it is and to plead with fans for patience and to say, we've done a poor job and we need to do better and we apologize and we hope you'll stick with us and keep in mind, still bring out your kids because they can get in for free, and we've lowered concessions, and we're offering ticket deals A, B, and C to come out and watch the Orioles, even though it's not pretty right now. We need your support, so here are the things that we want to do to entice you to come out here. If they had done that a couple months ago, I'm not saying they'd have 40,000 people in the ballpark by any means. I'm not saying they'd be any better on the field or anything like that, but maybe, just maybe, you would have imparted a little bit of goodwill towards your fan base in the interim that might be feeling a little better about things moving forward. But no, there hasn't been any of that. They've just had their heads down, and they've gone along, and there's been a lot of losing, and
it looks like there's going to be a lot more losing ahead, which I think is part of the issue.
Oh, and look, to be clear, whether it's Brady Anderson or John Angelos or Lou Angelos or even Peter Angelos getting in front of a camera saying something right now, the losing is going to continue for a while. There's no quick fix to this. I mean, you made the point as far as spending in free agency next year. There's no way this team should be spending in free agency next year.
Well, I guess that's my point. The offseason is going to be bereft of good news. No one's coming over the hill to save the team.
No, and I mean that's just the reality at this point.
And the manager they probably should hire should be some guy we've never heard of, right? Like, instead of going and trying to find Joe Torre or Tony La Russa to come back from the dead. I mean, that's part of all of this. It should not be Brady Anderson coming in the side door on the friends and family plan, but that's what's going to happen. So from jump, it's going to be effed up. Let me just take one quick break here and talk about a couple of our sponsors. Luke, I'm going to let you get back after us because I still think there's a lot of meat on the bone with Brady Anderson, and I think this is the most important segment along with John Angelos because all these other parts we're talking about, they're not going to be here next year other than Chris Davis, and we'll get to him. The Dear Orioles series is in progress. You can find it out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. All of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends, as well as my Free the Birds hat at King Discount Liquors. You can see the new ad. Lottery, beer, booze, the best prices in Baltimore. Get out to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Check out the new commercial with my Free the Bird shirt with Johnny Bev and the Paul King All-Stars, as well as the outtakes, which are always more fun. Fremont Mortgage, Carl Delmont and I are usually spotted somewhere out at Michael's Cafe. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need Fremont's education online. FremontMortgage.com. Buying, selling, if you're thinking about it. Carl joins us here every week or two to talk about the market and all that stuff, as well as a lot of soccer and World Cup. Fremont.com if you're in the market to buy, sell. Make sure you're checking them out. Also, last but never least, Amici's, the Pane Rotundo, the meatballs, the best marinara on earth over at High Street. Come on out and watch the World Cup with me. I'm going to be there this week watching the England game. So make sure you stop by, say hello, see Jody, see Rolando and Chef Scotto. Amici's of Little Italy. Luke, go ahead, man, on the Brady thing. And I mean, unless you, if you have something you want to add, because I'm about to wind you up with another part of this segment.
Well, I just think to the point that you just made about the manager, whoever comes in, I'm fine with it being unknown types because I think this team needs to get more innovative. They need to get more cutting edge. They need to, from a marketing standpoint, from a baseball ops standpoint, all of that. So I'm not sure a retread. I'm not sure a known commodity is necessarily that. I mean, Ned Colletti's name was out there recently as far as the organization talking to him in some capacity. I'm not so sure that the lesser-known guy working for some organization that, who knows, maybe is still not quite ready as you'd like him to be in a perfect world, but maybe he's still a good person to hire. Maybe that's the right person to hire. And maybe Brady Anderson's the president of baseball ops, but that person's really good at the day-to-day, and they've realized, hey, we have someone really good here. I mean, that's kind of what you're hoping for. I mean, we talked about this with Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette several years back. Yeah, you can talk all you want about why they took the job or why they were hired, why they were at all intrigued. And, Duquette's a little bit different story than Showalter, who hadn't been out of the game that long from the time he moved on from the Rangers. But, you just... Well,
Colletti's been gone 4 years. So, just, 4 years been out of the game. So,
But you hope you hire some good people. And that's where I lean much more to don't necessarily go for the big name or the retread or someone that is considered behind the times in terms of analytics. If anything, hire someone that's a year away from being truly ready with the thought that maybe they can grow into it. And, that's just my pie in the sky view on it. In a perfect world, it'd be someone that is the top assistant GM in baseball, whoever that might be right now. And there's different names you could throw out in a variety of places. But knowing that person isn't necessarily going to have any interest in coming to Baltimore, there's still good people out there you can hire if you're willing to make that kind of a hire rather than going for the low-hanging fruit of a name. And I don't think, and this is no disrespect to Ned Colletti, who has done good things in this game, and the perception with the Dodgers was that he did less with a whole lot more, quite frankly, considering some of the payrolls that he had. But, that's just one example. I'm not picking on him. I'd love to see this team think outside the box a little bit more, think a little more cutting edge, think a little more about future, and thinking about things you can do from an innovation standpoint to combat the fact that you have these two powerhouses in the AL East, rather than just saying, oh, look at how much money they spend, look at how good they are right now. More so, what can we do differently here to get an edge? And that was the genesis of Moneyball. I mean, the whole idea of doing something that wasn't valued by other teams. And I'd love to see the Orioles. And they were, I've mentioned it in previous conversations. There are things that they did do that were ahead of the curve. They were one of the teams ahead of the curve on the shift. For just one small example, I'd love to see this organization get to being innovative and being someone that's setting trends. And I don't have a whole lot of confidence that's going to happen, don't get me wrong, but if you're asking me what I'd love to see, that's what I'd love to see. And is Brady Anderson going to have that kind of clout to want to do something like that? I have no idea, but certainly the way the things have worked the last couple years with such uncertainty as far as who's been in charge, who's made what decision. As I've said to you, I've never thought it's been a case that Brady's been running it. I just think it's been very much muddied as far as who's making a decision about a certain thing at a certain period of time. And I feel you almost, is it an odd number day? Is it an even number day? What day of the week is it? And it's just, it's bad business to run any business that way. You need to have a chain of command, and ultimately when push comes to shove and you have a decision you need to make, yes or no on a deal, you need one person making that decision. And the best organizations, it's the GM, and it's very clear, or has been very unclear, how exactly that's worked for the Orioles over the last few years.
Luke Jones can be found, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. Last thing for you on this very, very chunky piece of our Dear Orioles series that's dedicated to Brady Anderson, or as I like to call him, Brady Angelos. It's fascinating to me all these years later that, Mark McGwire shows up in the dugout with the Padres hat and having been, guilty as charged, and Sammy Sosa has run off to become a Caucasian somewhere in the Caribbean and, pops up from time to, whatever the long-term disease that these guys caught for being cheaters, dopers, liars, schemers, all taking millions, tens of millions of dollars off of their ability to hit the baseball further because of this. Where do you lie on the Brady Anderson thing of his denial of steroid use or PEDs, or at what point does integrity take over? At what point do you really, 2 decades later, wear some sort of a public scarlet letter as though parts of your career were in the shadows? And that would be for Lance Armstrong. That would be for anyone in any sport. For the Flojos and for all the cheating track stars and all the stuff that's gone on. In baseball, it's fascinating to me that some people like Barry Bonds are toxic and untouchable, and others like Brady Anderson can be brought in the side door. Now, of course, Brady was never convicted, only accused, but accused in the high mind crimes. It is fascinating 20 years later that we just, that's Brady Anderson. He had 50 home runs once. Well, did he or did he not? I don't know. I certainly all parts of that are in dispute. And I go back to the Angelos problem that I have and the problem that I have with the creep who runs the country. There's an integrity part of this when you've been lied to over and over and over again, and when your eyes tell you and your mind tells you what your eyes believe. And in the case of Brady Anderson, I have a real integrity issue with anyone of that era who did the things on the field before, during, after, and all the Rafael Palmeiro finger wag and the Mark McGuire, I'm not here to talk about the past. I went through all of that. I've been here from the beginning. I was in the locker rooms with these guys and their special milkshakes and, all the nonsense that went on. I find it hard to give it integrity 20 years later and look at it with any integrity when it lacked integrity then and it lacks integrity now for me. And I think Brady does come with part of that package to some degree that, let's say, his buddy Cal Ripken somehow doesn't come with.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Look, I've long moved on from caring about PED use. Up to 20
so
years
you
ago,
vote them into the
frankly.
Hall of Fame if you had. I mean, I'm only asking because I think that's been the annual. If everybody was cheating, is it cheating at all? Do we put Fred McGriff in the Hall of Fame? Do we not? Palmeiro's a 500, 3,000 guy who's never getting in. And, and then we start to put Pudge Rodriguez in and Mike Piazza and other guys that always felt like, Pudge Rodriguez, come on. It's like, I don't know what to say.
Right. And look, this was such a systemic issue. It really was. And, everyone, including media, quite frankly, because baseball needed a shot in the arm, no pun intended there, after the strike. And, Ripken provided that with the streak in 95. But the home run chase and that whole era, that really boosted baseball's popularity again. That they probably wouldn't have had that.
And it boosted Brady Anderson's income when he could hit 30 home runs all of a sudden.
So everyone, from ownership to front office people to managers, everyone other than players who had the conviction to not do it no matter what. And again, I'm not someone who sits there and says with full 100% conviction for anyone that to know that they were clean. I hear baseball writers talk, well, that guy was clean. Well, do you really know that? Do you really know that? No, you don't. So that's where I'm not saying it should be celebrated, but that's where I've really moved on from that whole discussion.
By the way, in his first 1,500 at-bats, Brady Anderson hit 12 home runs. It's unbelievable. Like when you just look at the stats, forget him, forget what your eyes told you. It really, the back of his baseball card is the most, dubious of all, like literally. And he's going to be running and no one says anything about anything anymore. And I lived through this when it really was like, when Giambi admitted it, it was a scarlet letter. You had to go hang your head in shame, and you had to do 40 licks and go away for a little while and get clean and come back and clean up your image. I guess 20 years later, time kind of heals everything. And, guys like Brady Anderson who were a part of that who never, ever, Brady will still sit and tell you that those 50 home runs came because he ate Wheaties. I promise you he'll tell you that. And that's all part of the integrity part of the I'm not really buying it. You know what I mean? I'm just not buying it.
And I'm not saying you have to. At the same time, Davey Johnson hit 43 home runs in 1973. He had hit more than 10 3 times in his career. You can find statistical anomalies. And look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether Brady Anderson was clean or not. And who cares? I was 12 years old.
Well, Brady Anderson will tell you he's clean, so that's cool.
But that said, unless you have hard evidence, and look, you got to go beyond that, because I just gave you a perfect example. Do I think Davey Johnson did steroids in 1973? No, I don't. I think sometimes really weird things happen in baseball, and that said, I'm not going to dispute it either and say that he didn't do it. I don't know. I know what the numbers say in 1996 compared to what it was.
I just know that 20 years ago when you did that, it said you were a cheater, and it doesn't say that anymore. And I guess that's where we are in life. I mean, I don't know, but I still associate Brady Anderson with me scratching my head and saying, are you an honest human being? Did you or did you not? If you're an honest human being, I'll take you at face value. Brady has always honestly said there was nothing going on with me. I mean, I worked out in the offseason. Okay. Then if it's like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, when your lead story is a lie, or I'm skeptical of it, or I'm not buying your lead story, I have a real hard time with that as a human being. Measuring information, which is what I do for a living and have always done. I have a hard time with that. I do. And so that's, if we're going to talk about Brady Anderson for 50 minutes and talk about his baseball acumen, I think we should take 5 minutes and at least talk about that part of this. That's all.
And that's fine. But again, even if he did, what's the penalty for that? Does that mean he should be?
There is no penalty.
Should never be allowed to work in baseball again?
I guess the point is there was no penalty for any of those guys in the end, other than whatever the physical price they pay for any of them for having put stuff in their body. I mean, I guess for Ken Caminiti, you start to talk about him, right?
Well, and that's where I stop and ask, well, why is Bud Selig in the Hall of Fame then? I mean, seriously.
And Marvin Miller's not.
If we're going to talk about it in that terms, and baseball enabled that, and like I said, baseball profited from that for a long, long time, and I don't know, and I know probably some people are listening to me and saying, "Man, you're really flippant about that." I just have been. I am so worn out on that whole discussion
because it's been an overwhelming, overriding black cloud of everything that affected 10 to 15 years of baseball in your childhood, and every conversation kind of does with a guy my age begin with that. It really does. I mean, it does.
And it also ruins the good stories too. I mean, I just cited the Davey Johnson example. I mean, Davey Johnson hit 43 home runs out of nowhere.
In a bandbox, by the way, but it was a little bit.
Yeah, right, but he hit 5 home runs the year before for the Orioles. I mean, 5. He went from 5 to 43, so, no one looks at that with a skeptical eye by any means.
Because it didn't happen in 1996 where 40 other guys were doing the same thing, and all of them put 30 pounds of muscle mass on in the offseason, and 15 years later, they were all sort of indicted, popped, called out, tested. Their foreheads shrunk back to normal when the HGH stopped. Some of them went off the deep end like Lenny Dykstra. So there are all those other ancillaries, and some of them became the hitting coach of the San Diego Padres, and some of them, the clean guys like Brady Anderson, the guys that didn't cheat like Brady, those guys get to go on and run organizations in baseball.
Well, but you also have guys who have been accused and very well might not have done anything over the years, and that's
or not accused in Cal Ripken because it's Cal Ripken, and how could you accuse him of anything?
I mean, we could sit here and
or Ken Griffey, how can you accuse him?
We could spin our wheels talking about the steroid era.
Well, we have for 20 years, but when the
continue.
guy who's running the organization hit 12 home runs in his first 1,500 at bats, and all of a sudden was hitting 50. Then and he's running the team. It should be ethics and integrity, and questioning that should. I'm allowed to do that for 5 minutes, so I just did. So
that's fine. That's fine. I don't know how relevant what happened 20 years ago is to where he is now in a different, in a
no doubt about it,
of potentially running an organization. But I hear you. I mean, I wonder about lots of people. I wonder about guys today. Even with much more rigid testing going on, much more rigid testing than other sports have, quite frankly, at this point. But at some point in time, you can drive yourself crazy with that stuff. I mean, that's why some of the Hall of Fame discussion that you hear every year just it wears me out, and I've really gotten to a point where put them in, and the Hall of Fame, you're a museum, right? You capture the history in the same way that American history can't ignore the Civil War or slavery or the Trail of Tears or any other black mark on the history of this country. You have to acknowledge that. In the same way, the National Baseball Hall of Fame should acknowledge that there was an era where players took performance-enhancing drugs, and there was no testing, and there was no accountability, and that starts with the top, with the commissioner and owners, because they enabled that, and they profited from that in so many cases. That's my little soapbox spiel to kind of tie up that part of the conversation.
And all of that, I'll bring it back to the fact that Brady Anderson was my favorite baseball player from 1992 until, such point where he went to Cleveland and, hit 162 or whatever. By the way, boy, his career went off a cliff. I mean, it's crazy, He hit 257 in 2000, and he couldn't hit the baseball 2 years later. Kind of very Chris Davis-y, literally. Like, if you look at the way it kind of went off the cliff, it kind of went off the cliff that way. All right, Luke, we'll continue this Dear Orioles series. We have to get to Manny Machado and Adam Jones and Chris Davis and Zach Britton and all of the above. You can find it all out in the BioToyota.com Audio Vault. These have been very, very chunky segments here for your summer listening. I am writing the Dear Orioles series, my personal letters to all of the aforementioned people in the Orioles organization between now and when Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson toss it around. We've also got room in Canton, Ohio for the Ray Lewis trip. Speaking of legends. And was it Deer Antler Spry? I don't know what that was, but neither did Ray Lewis. I saw the press conference. He didn't use any of that sort of stuff. August 3rd, that weekend, we're going to be out in Canton, Ohio, doing all of that. Indians, Pirates, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the Pro Football Hall of Fame game with the Chicago Bears, and all the other Hall of Fame stuff. And the good news is T.O. won't be there, so that means more room for you on the bus. You can go to WNST.net under the Trips tab and learn more about that there. Don't forget, each and every morning we deliver the morning newspaper. The Dear Orioles chats will also be in the morning newspaper. It delivers at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life guarantee. Dennis is here this Thursday, every Thursday, the SSV on WNST, right on up until that point, where the Orioles deal Manny Machado to, I don't know, the Phillies, the Diamondbacks, the Braves, the Indians, anywhere but the Red Sox or the Yankees because, we're afraid of dealing them to them. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.